It started like any other Tuesday afternoon on Loose Women. The studio lights were warm, the audience was buzzing with excitement, and Dame Judi Dench sat poised in the guest chair, her presence commanding the kind of respect that decades of legendary performances naturally bring. She was there to promote her latest memoir, to share stories from a career that had touched generations. The panelists were all smiles. Ruth Langsford opened with her trademark warmth, asking about Judy's early days at the Old Vic. The audience leaned in. Everything felt perfectly choreographed, perfectly safe. But then Denise Welch spoke. It wasn't the question itself that landed wrong at first. Denise asked about method acting, about how far actors should go to embody their roles, about the mental toll it takes. Reasonable enough. But there was something in her tone, something sharp hidden beneath the casual delivery. Judy's smile tightened just slightly at the corners. She answered diplomatically, talking about discipline, about craft, about the responsibility actors have to protect themselves while still serving the story. Denise leaned forward. But surely, Judy, there's a difference between protecting yourself and just phoning it in. I mean, some of the younger actors today, they give everything. They bleed for their roles. And then you see performances that feel comfortable, safe. The word hung in the air like smoke. Safe. The audience shifted in their seats. Ruth's eyes widened just a fraction. Janet Street Porter stopped mid-sip of her tea. You could feel it, that subtle change in atmospheric pressure that happens right before a storm breaks. Judy set her teacup down with deliberate care. The china clinked softly against the saucer. When she looked up, her expression hadn't changed much, but something in her eyes had gone absolutely glacial. "Safe," Judy repeated, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of 70 years in the theater. "That's an interesting word, Denise. Tell me, have you ever spent 8 shows a week performing Shakespeare? Have you ever had to find something new, something true, in the same lines you've spoken 1,000 times before? Because I assure you, there is nothing safe about standing on a stage completely exposed, with nowhere to hide." Denise's jaw tightened. "I'm not talking about theater, Judy. I'm talking about film, about television, about showing up and actually being vulnerable instead of relying on reputation." The audience gasped. Someone in the back actually said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphones to catch it. Ruth tried to jump in, tried to redirect, but Denise wasn't finished. "You know what I think," Denise continued, her voice rising now, her northern accent getting sharper with each word. "I think some people get to a certain level, get their damehoods and their awards, and they forget what it means to actually take risks. They forget what it's like to be hungry, to really want something so badly you'd do anything for it." Judy's composure was legendary, but you could see her breathing change. Her chest rose and fell just a little faster. Her hands, usually so graceful and still, had formed into tight fists in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but absolutely lethal. "And I think some people mistake volume for depth, controversy for courage. They perform their pain for attention instead of channeling it into craft. They confuse publicity with artistry." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But then again, I suppose we all have our methods, don't we, Denise?" The reference was unmistakable. Denise had been famously open about her struggles with depression, her journey with mental health, often discussing it on air. Judy's words could have been interpreted as supportive in another context, but the way she said them, the ice in her delivery, made it clear that wasn't how she meant it. Denise's face went white, then red. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh and jarring through the studio. "How dare you," she said, her voice shaking now, not with weakness but with rage. "How dare you sit there in your ivory tower and judge me? You have no idea what I've been through, no idea what it takes to show up every single day and be real with people, to actually connect instead of hiding behind fancy words and period costumes." Judi rose from her seat as well, slower, more controlled. But there was fire in her eyes that no amount of classical training could disguise. "You know exactly what it takes," she said, and her voice could cut glass. "I know what it takes to work when your heart is broken, to perform the day after your husband dies, to find strength when you feel nothing but grief. Don't you dare lecture me about pain, about sacrifice, about showing up. Don't you dare!" The silence that followed was deafening. The cameras kept rolling, frozen crews unsure whether to keep filming or cut away. Ruth had her hand over her mouth. Janet was staring, wide-eyed, her usual quick wit completely abandoned. Colleen Noland had tears in her eyes. In the audience, someone started crying. Denise was shaking now, her whole body vibrating with emotion. "Get off my show," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Get off! You don't get to come in here and—" "Your show?" Judi eyebrow arched, aristocratic disdain dripping from every syllable. "I was under the impression this was a collective. But of course, it's always about you, isn't it, Denise? The loudest voice, the biggest victim, the most authentic." She picked up her handbag with steady hands. "Well, don't worry, I wouldn't dream of staying another moment." That's when Denise moved toward her, not aggressively, not physically, but close enough that a producer in a headset jumped from behind the cameras and moved between them. "Ladies, please," the producer said, his voice cracking with nerves. But Judi was already walking away, her heels clicking against the studio floor with military precision. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. Most just sat there stunned, their mouths open. A few people were recording on their phones, despite the strict no phones policy, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Denise stood there in the center of the panel, her chest heaving, her face flushed. Ruth tried to touch her arm, but Denise pulled away. "Don't," she said. "Just don't." She turned to the cameras, to the audience, and for a moment she looked utterly lost. Then she turned and walked off set in the opposite direction, leaving Ruth and the remaining panelists to somehow salvage what was left of the show. The producer called for a commercial break. The audience sat in shell-shocked silence. Behind the scenes, it was chaos. People were on phones, producers were arguing, and somewhere in the labyrinth of ITV corridors, Judi Dench was being escorted out of the building by two uncomfortable-looking security guards who had absolutely no idea what to do with a national treasure who'd just been kicked off a daytime television program. In her dressing room, Denise sat alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was smudged where she'd wiped angry tears away. Her hands were still shaking. Janet knocked quietly and came in without waiting for an answer. "That was—" Janet started, then trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I know," Denise said quietly. "She shouldn't have said that about your—" "No, she shouldn't have, but I shouldn't have called her safe. I shouldn't have—" "God, Janet, what did I just do?" Meanwhile, in a car pulling away from the ITV studios, Judi Dench sat in the back seat, her publicist frantically typing on her phone beside her. Judi stared out the window at the London streets passing by, her face unreadable. Her phone was already ringing. Text messages were flooding in, but she didn't move to answer any of them. She just sat there, and if you looked very closely, you could see her hands trembling in her lap. Dame Judi, we need to prepare a statement, her publicist said nervously. Not now, Judi said quietly. But the press will, I said, not now. Her voice wasn't harsh, just tired. So incredibly tired. I lost my temper. I never lose my temper. The publicist wisely said nothing. Back at the studio, the show eventually continued, but it was like watching people move through water. Ruth tried her best to be professional, to redirect the conversation to lighter topics, but nobody was really paying attention anymore. The audience was still processing what they'd witnessed. The remaining panelists looked shell-shocked. Social media was already exploding. Clips were being uploaded, memes were being created, think pieces were being written in real time. That evening, Denise sat in her home, nursing a glass of wine, her phone face down on the table. She'd turned off notifications after the first 100 messages. Her partner tried to comfort her, but she barely registered his presence. She kept replaying it in her mind, every word, every look, every moment where she could have pulled back and didn't. I was trying to make a point about authenticity, she said to the empty room, about not coasting on reputation, and instead I proved her right, didn't I? I performed. I made it about me. Across London, in her elegant home in Surrey, Judi sat in her study, surrounded by scripts and books and photographs from a lifetime of work. She'd declined dinner, declined phone calls. She sat in her favorite chair with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, and she thought about all the times she'd preached control, discipline, grace under pressure. All the young actors she'd mentored, advising them to never let emotion overtake craft. M would be ashamed, she whispered to herself, referring to her late husband, who'd always been her anchor, her conscience. Absolutely ashamed. Neither of them slept well that night. Neither of them would sleep well for several nights after. Because the thing about public confrontations is that they can never really be taken back. The cameras had caught everything. The internet had made it permanent. And somewhere in that studio, in those few heated minutes, two women who'd spent their entire lives in the public eye had forgotten the first rule of performance. Always leave them wanting more. Never leave them wanting to look away. The next morning, ITV released a statement saying Dame Judi Dench would not be returning to finish her interview, that the situation had been unfortunate, and that they supported both women as respected figures in British entertainment. It was careful, diplomatic, and said absolutely nothing at all. Denise issued her own statement through her publicist. I have immense respect for Dame Judi's body of work. Yesterday's discussion became more heated than intended, and I regret any hurt caused. Passion sometimes clouds judgment, and I take full responsibility for my part in what occurred. Judi's statement was shorter. I pride myself on professionalism and grace. Yesterday, I failed to embody either. I apologize to the Loose Women team, the audience, and to Miss Welch. There is no excuse for what I said. They were proper statements, appropriate statements. But anyone who'd seen what happened knew that the wounds were deeper than any press release could acknowledge. The clip would be replayed for years, analyzed, memed, debated. Some would say Denise was right to challenge the establishment. Others would say Judi was defending hard-earned respect. Most would simply remember it as the day two titans collided and both walked away diminished. In the weeks that followed, neither woman spoke about it publicly beyond their initial statements. They didn't appear on panels together. They didn't reference each other in interviews. But people noticed that Denise's next several appearances on Loose Women were subdued, more measured. And people noticed that Judi's next interview on a different program was especially warm, especially gracious, as if she was trying to prove to herself and everyone else that the person they saw that day wasn't who she really was. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a bad moment, A perfect storm of misunderstanding and wounded pride and two strong personalities colliding at exactly the wrong angle. Or maybe it was a glimpse of something real beneath the polish, the proof that even legends are human, even icons can break, and that sometimes the most dramatic performances aren't the ones we plan. The camera captured it all: the tension, the explosion, the aftermath. And somewhere in those frames, between the harsh words and the hurt feelings, there was a truth that both women would have to live with forever. That sometimes being real means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means being capable of hurting and being hurt, no matter how famous you are, no matter how respected, no matter how untouchable you think you've become. The show went on. It always does. But nothing was quite the same after that day. And in the quiet moments, when the lights were off and the cameras were packed away, both women probably wondered if it had been worth it, if any point is worth proving at that cost, if authenticity is really authentic when it leaves everyone wounded in its wake. They say time heals all wounds. Maybe it does. But some moments, once recorded, once witnessed, once made permanent by the unblinking eye of the camera, never really go away. They just become part of the story. Another chapter. Another cautionary tale. Another reminder that the line between performance and reality, between character and self, is sometimes thinner than we'd like to believe.